Good morning. Thanks for tuning in to Burke's interview with Alex Laskey, founder and president of O-Power. We're really excited to have Alex here today. I'm especially excited to be interviewing former boss and friend. This segment is part of a new initiative at Burke. In addition to our annual Symposium and Innovation Expo, this year we're launching a pre-symposium. The idea with the pre-symposium is to put rich content online prior to our symposium, which is October 18th this year. We hope you can attend. And this will be our first interview. All the questions we have today were submitted online through Burke members, the Burke community, and the O-Power community. So let's get started.
Thanks for coming back, Dave.
Thanks. So before we get into the submitted questions, can you just start out by telling us what O-Power is and how you came to found this company with Dan?
Sure. O-Power is a software as a service business. We work with utilities across the globe, now in 6 countries, 80-something utilities. And we work with utilities to help them take their data, which they are increasingly have a significant amount of as smart meters come in, et cetera. Take that data, which is fundamentally boring data, and turn it into interesting information and insights that get communicated to their customers. And primarily the interest is to help customers reduce their energy consumption and to shave peak as well. So how did we get the idea to start the company? Well, I used to run political campaigns. I lived in Berkeley for a while, lived in San Francisco, and was tired of losing campaigns, but increasingly interested in energy and environmental policy. And Dan, who my co-founder, was an old friend of mine. We'd gone to school together. He came back from this massive road trip from Alaska to Patagonia, 9-month trip with his then girlfriend. And they survived the trip, and they're now married. And as of last week, they have a baby boy together. So, but one of the things that didn't survive the trip was Dan started on the trip sort of not terribly concerned about environmental issues. And driving through Latin America was awakened to the severity of the problem facing all of us in terms of environmental degradation, and came back committed to doing something about it. So he approached me about doing something together, and we decided it would be a good idea to work together. We'd have fun, and so we squatted an office space in San Francisco and then rented it, and basically had a bunch of ideas, but this idea was inspired by the fact that both of us took somewhat extraordinary efforts to reduce our dependence on gasoline. And Dan, this was after driving through the Americas. Dan drove a hybrid, not terribly extraordinary. I carpooled with people I didn't really like, and it was inconvenient, all to save gasoline. And yet at the same time, neither one of us had any clue how we were doing in terms of saving energy in our own homes. And the only communication we got that was personalized for us was a bill that made basically no sense. And so the idea we had was, there's a better way to do this. This bill is outdated. There ought to be a way to take the same data from the bill and combine it with other sources and turn it into communications that actually gave people useful information and helped them understand how they could save.
And that leads us to where we are now.
Yeah. Just 5 short years later.
So our first question comes from Phil from Boulder, and I promise this was not a plant. It starts out very complimentary. It says, "Hi, Alex.
Hi, Phil.
Love your company, as O-Power has some very innovative products and market solutions. Do you see a long-term trend in energy efficiency, more from utility customers via conservation techniques, or more from utilities, infrastructure upgrades, etc.?"
Well, I think it has to be an all of the above solution. McKinsey issued a report in 2009 that suggested that in North America, or in the US alone, that we had an opportunity to gain efficiency on the customer side by more than 20% reduction in usage over the next decade, at a cost of something like $213 billion, but at a savings of $492 billion. So I think approximately $280 billion cost savings for the American people. And this is just on the customer side of things. There's increasing evidence that the opportunity is actually quite a bit larger than that. Just from customers alone, there's a huge opportunity for efficiency, and we need it. And on the grid side, and on the utility side, there's tremendous opportunity as well. A lot of electricity is lost between the power plant and the home. And perhaps more importantly, and maybe this is what Phil is getting at, electricity is boring. We all have a lot going on in our lives. Whether we're in school or starting companies or working in companies, we have kids to worry about, girlfriends and boyfriends to worry about, and mortgages and retirement accounts. The last thing we want to think about is our energy use in our home. And so, we started a business, even though we were a software startup in Silicon Valley, we started a business working with utilities and to get them, because they're the ones who have the data, they have a trusted brand when it comes to energy, and if they're motivated properly, they can drive the big changes among their customer base rather than going directly to customers. And so, I think there's a huge opportunity for utilities to play. They're going to be the most important actors in this to drive real efficiency over the next several decades. Great. And just to address one more piece that was sort of inherent in Phil's question, it's estimated that electricity use worldwide is going to grow by a third in the next 18 years. So we're going to have a 35% increase, 33% increase in electricity use in the next 18 years. And we simply don't have the resources to continue to do that. Taking aside from the environmental impact that increased electricity use will have, these are scarce resources. They will become more expensive. There are wars being fought for them. We have an obligation to one another to become more efficient.
On that point about what you bring up, you brought it from the United States internationally. I know Opower is now doing work in several countries and expanding. I'm curious, as a follow-up, what Opower is learning from what other countries are doing to influence energy efficiency and behavior, and if there's lessons from other countries we should be bringing back here.
Well, it's interesting, actually. So we're now working in 6 countries, 3 continents, well, candidly, on the policy side, there is much more happening in the U.S. in terms of utility regulation and aligning the utilities' interests with the public interest than anywhere else. And the rest of the world is looking to the U.S. But to say the U.S. is the leaders in energy efficiency is not really accurate because, of course, people around the rest of the world and in Europe particularly, well, not just Europe particularly, but across the globe, use a lot less energy per capita than we do. They live in homes that are smaller. They have much more efficient appliances. And those homes, building codes, appliance codes are all, lighting codes, these things are all increasing, and I think those are some of the key drivers for efficiency. So it's an interesting thing. Culturally, there's much we can learn from the rest of the world. We simply can't, it's not sustainable or affordable for us to continue to live in all of us in giant houses. There are going to be 2 to 3 billion people entering the middle class in the developing world over the next 30 to 40 years, and we can't all live in giant houses with giant cars and expect that somehow we're going to make this work.
So continuing on the policy angle, we have a question from Gwen in Washington, D.C., and she says, what are the biggest barriers standing in the way of even larger energy efficiency gains in the United States, I guess, policy or otherwise?
From a policy perspective, I think there are 3 core pieces of policy that could drive efficiency, and then we can get to the barriers. There's codes and standards, and those are in 2 different categories. Codes and standards on buildings, new buildings, and retrofits, and codes and standards on appliances and lighting. Obviously, equipment uses a significant amount of the electricity, and no matter how efficient people are in their homes, if they live in a house that is poorly insulated or with equipment that is inefficient, there's only so much that the individuals can do. On the other side, the other big policy driver is the one that we're most focused on, which is again, utilities are for the most part for-profit entities, and they're fully regulated by their state utility commissions. There are some states, California among them, which has taken a lead of putting in progressive regulation that aligns to utility incentives. In California, it's a decoupling mechanism with an efficiency resource standard, and not to get too wonky on this, but essentially the utilities, PG&E that serve Berkeley, Southern California, and Semper utilities will make more money by delivering on efficiency than they do by building new power plants. Unfortunately, across the globe, that's the exception. There are 26 states in the U.S. that have some form of this, but the big opportunity is to ratchet up even further the incentives, and I mean both positive incentives for utilities to achieve efficiency and penalties for their failure to in the U.S. and elsewhere. I think there are 26 states that have an EERS, the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, and nearly all of them are on track to achieve or exceed that standard. So the answer has to be, let's raise the standard and raise the incentives.
And I guarantee you our audience appreciates wonky.
Okay, good. I can give them more.
Yeah.
But the question of one of the questions, and I think it's a difficult, challenging thing. One of the Gwen asked about what the barriers are. So those are the policy outcomes that would be good. But there's a lot of status quo interests that are opposed to changing policy. There are people who think that the open market just works and without regulation. And the reality is we can't have it both ways. We want to regulate utilities. We regulate utilities at the state level. They're monopolies. They're accountable to the public service commissions. So we can't pretend that they operate in a free market. They don't operate in a free market, and we should be regulating them. Similarly, on the folks who make appliances today and own a lion's share of the market, it's my belief, and several of them believe this, that the more stringent the standards and the efficiency standards are, the more opportunity they will have to innovate. But of course, there's always going to be laggards who want to just keep things the way they are.
And do you think that there could be progress made in any of those areas with the next administration? How likely do you think it is that there could be progress in some of those areas that do touch national policy?
I mean, I think I'm an optimist, and I'm optimistic that regardless who the next president is, the energy efficiency makes sense. The numbers we talked about earlier, this McKinsey report, $280 billion net opportunity for Americans in the next decade in saving energy. It's good economics. Energy efficiency resource standards have been passed by Republican governors and Democratic governors. Of course, it exists in California and in Massachusetts, but Governor Pawlenty, Republican, passed one into law in Minnesota that's one of the most effective in the country, a 15% goal for utilities, and not just goal, but mandate for utilities over a 10-year period to reduce electricity. It's an important ingredient for economic competitiveness. So I'm optimistic that the next administration, whether it's another 4 years of an Obama administration or Governor Romney, that they will be committed to this issue.
Next question is from Adam, a Burke member who's down in Silicon Valley, and he says, do you think there is a particular price for electricity higher than the current average price, and we're talking about the United States, that would act as a tipping point to get consumers to make large behavioral changes?
Yeah.
Imagine he's talking about, there's been studies around oil prices.
Right.
Do you think there's a similar magic price?
So I think oil prices are a great example. Gasoline is I heard today something like the average price of gasoline is $3.72 a gallon across the country. I'm sure it's much higher in California. And yet people are driving, and I don't know how much these gas prices they've affected some discretionary driving, some weekend trips that people would otherwise take aren't being taken, but largely I don't think driving habits have changed all that much. And car buying habits have changed around the fringes, but there are still plenty of people buying SUVs and big inefficient vehicles. And probably far fewer of them being purchased in Berkeley, but better and worse Berkeley is not representative of the rest of the world. I think mostly worse. Unfortunately, it would be great if there were more Berkeleys. So, it's hard to imagine a price of electricity that we could reasonably imagine would happen that would drive significant change. To put it in context, there was a study done by an MIT economist evaluating our program and evaluating a dozen or so of our programs with utilities across the country, and we save around 2% on average on people's electric usage. So not a significant amount in any one home, but across millions of homes we've had a big impact. His analysis was that the price of electricity would have to go up between 16 and 25% in order to get that same 2% reduction in consumption. So politically, an increase in prices by 16 to 25% is probably not feasible, even if it's justified by the environmental impact. And again, that's not as much change as we need to have. So I think it'd be good, if I'm supportive of cap and trade or a carbon tax or assigning a real cost to these externalities, and that would have an impact on raising prices. But I don't think that price alone will encourage the behavior change that we need.
This next question is actually in reference to the impact Opower is having.
Yeah.
And this is from Vance in San Francisco, and he says, what tools will Opower use to help save the next 1.5 terawatts?
Vance is following us. Thanks, Vance. So just for your viewers who are not as tuned into what we've accomplished as Vance is, I announced earlier this week, October 1st, that we had saved 1.5 terawatt hours of electricity in the 4.5 years that we've been in business. And of course, that still means, for even to the energy nerds watching this may not mean what it's unclear. What does 1.5 terawatt hours mean? 1.5 terawatt hours is enough electricity to power the city of New Orleans for a year. It's we've saved people $175 million on their utility bills. If you look at the entire installed solar base in solar power plants, solar PV across the U.S. In 2011, all those power plants combined produced 1.7 terawatt hours of electricity, and we've saved 1.5 terawatt hours. So I'm proud of the impact that we've had. It's meaningful, and what's I think just as exciting is that we saved we saved 1.5 terawatt hours over the last 4.5 years. In the next 12 months, we're going to save another 1.5 terawatt hours. So it speaks to the scale. So to answer Vance's question, how are we going to save the next 1.5 terawatt hours? In some measures, that's already fixed because we're going to do that over the next 12 months. We're giving better information to customers around the world, to millions and millions of households, and people are motivated to do the right thing. They just need the information to do it. So that's how we're going to get the next 1.5 terawatt hours. How we're going to get the next 15 terawatt hours is probably a question that is there's still opportunities to shape that. I think it'll come from a combination of things. One is there's essentially three dimensions here. One is by selling our products and delivering our products to more utilities and therefore to more customers. So we're entering new markets. We've entered Australia, New Zealand, France, the UK, Canada, and we're in 30 states or so on. So we'll continue to expand into new states, and within those utilities expand to more households. And that will increase our ability to have an impact. The other two things that I'm excited about and are perhaps new was increasing the types of communications we deliver to customers. So actually, I think when you were here, Gabe, working with us, nearly all of our communications to customers came through the mail. These home energy reports, which probably are not in focus in this video, delivered to now more than 10 million households across the globe that show people how their consumption compares to neighbors and then target tips and recommendations. I'm proud to say that today a majority of our communications to customers are coming through digital channels. Emails, text messages, phone calls. We'll be introducing other channels as well. We have a partnership with Facebook that I'm proud of that allows us to communicate through Facebook to customers. And these layered communications and different kinds of insights and different kinds of functionality you can provide through these other channels will increase the percentage impact that we have. And then the third area is for other products. So, our first, there's been a lot of talk for a long time about home energy management, and our focus there is in a partnership with Honeywell, where the HVAC system in the house, on average in the U.S., uses 50% of the load in the house. Probably smaller percentage in Berkeley, where there's pleasant weather and not much air conditioning. But most of the country, 50% of the load comes from air conditioning, and the interface to that air conditioning is I was going to make a comparison to the programmable VCR, but you guys are probably even too young to remember that, or you do remember it, but it's an outdated interface. And so we're introducing with Honeywell a new thermostat, which we're now piloting with a handful of utilities, where the thermostat controls sit on the internet and on the iPhone. And again, you can pull mine up, but you won't be able to see it. It's really cool. We think that our experience in engaging people with energy, our ability to analyze and then do interesting insights with massive amounts of energy data, and the partnership with Honeywell will allow us to have a big impact there on saving a lot more than the next 1.5 terawatt-hours of electricity.
Definitely remember the flashing 12 on the 12 o'clock on my VCR.
Yes, exactly.
I think this next question will be of particular interest to the science community at Berk.
Yeah.
And this is from Carl. He says, have you seen any areas of research or potential new technological advances in either behavioral science or energy that really get you excited?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there are a lot of new techniques that are coming out of the field of big data and running analytics on massive data sets that allow us to derive insights we couldn't possibly have derived, that allow us to communicate much more quickly, almost instantaneously with customers when we learn things about them. So one of the things, and so I already described my background to you guys as coming from the world of politics. So for me to get into a detailed description of big data is probably not wise. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and we've hired people from Cloudera, from Yahoo, from Google, from Amazon.com, who are all building out our core data infrastructure to allow us to make best use of all these new techniques. On the behavioral science stuff, there's always new and exciting experiments that are happening, and we are playing with a bunch of these new ideas, and I have high hopes that we'll be able to increase our impact by finding new ways to hook and engage people.
Right.
I'm sorry, you're not going to give more detail now, but we'll be announcing some new things.
We'll look out for it. Two last questions. We have a few minutes here, and they're both about sort of broadening the impact into other areas, or using power techniques in other areas. And this one's from actually Berk co-president Alex, and he says, could you take the O-Power approach of using technology to inform consumers about their energy use and apply this to emerging economies in the developing world where there's much less infrastructure and wildly different use patterns and requirements?
Yeah, we think the answer is yes. We today work with utilities like PG&E, where we get data from their customers, and the data is every 15 minutes, smart meter data. So we get 96 reads a day per customer per meter. If electric and gas, we're getting 192 reads a day. And we have utilities that we work with that read their meters once every 3 months. We're able to offer different types of functionality to customers with 15 minutes versus 3 months. But we're able to get savings and impact even on the 3 months one. Of course, our approach has to be localized and appropriate for the community. We need to work with the appropriate communications channels. So maybe it's increased focus on mobile in some communities and less online, or increased focus on paper and less digital. But we have teams of people who are doing that kind of research to identify what are the right ways to communicate in different cultures. So I'm optimistic and excited about the ability to do that with varying degrees of infrastructure. And hopefully also over time, we'll be able to continue to demonstrate what are the customer benefits and the environmental benefits to upgrading infrastructure from a communications perspective and an information perspective. Because I think one of the things that is holding back infrastructure investments, both in developing economies and in the developed world, is that it's unclear what the benefits are. There's reliability benefits, and those can be calculated or estimated. There's benefits to allowing in renewables, but the benefit to what are the benefits from the information services that can be provided on top of this data? That's still to be proven, and we have some great initial evidence, and hopefully we'll have more, and that will help drive innovation across the utility industry, and not just for our company.
Great. Last question from Kevin, also in San Francisco, and he says, millions of gallons of fresh usable water that could be saved each year if gains were made in water usage efficiency. How would you adapt your process to address water usage?
So I think there's an opportunity in water, and in a world in which over 1 billion people don't have access to clean drinking water, it is particularly frustrating that we waste so much of it. Although those two are not, our saving it doesn't help people in rural India to have it, but it just feels morally reprehensible. I think there's a lot that can be done on the water side. There is the reality, though, is that in water, most of the efficiency opportunities in the near term are on the systems themselves, so leakage in outdated and old infrastructure where there's a lot of leakage before it ever gets to the home or the building. And then, of course, industrial and agricultural and commercial users of water those are the biggest places for efficiency to be gained. And so isn't to say that there isn't water efficiency to be gained on the residential side. It's just, I don't think it's a near-term priority. There are other lower-hanging fruit.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have from our audience, and it looks like our time is up. So I really want to thank you for taking this time, and I know our audience really appreciated it, and we hope you'll continue this relationship with Burke.
Sure, and enjoy the symposium in a couple weeks. I hope it goes well, and I'll look forward to participating in one in the future. And keep getting involved in this stuff. There's certainly we have a bunch of Haas grads here, Burke grads here at OPower, and OPower grads at Burke, but there are a lot of problems to go out and solve in this space, and whether it's here or somewhere else, I hope you guys remain enthusiastic about solving them.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah.